just going to spend a little bit of time this morning talking about trends in contract manufacturing, often called tolling. And what I had done to prepare for this is to survey a variety of the SOCMA membership who are tollers, and also some of the big customers that these members and others use. So I went out and I spoke with Dow and DuPont and BASF and a few others to get their perspectives on what are they looking for in a tolling relationship. So this is really anecdotal. This is not scientific. This is really just back-of-the-envelope perspectives from both sides of the partnership. And I think that some of the perspectives are quite interesting and timely. So first of all, obviously over the last several decades, chemical companies, both large and small, have become much more comfortable with outsourced manufacturing. And that's how this show got started back in 1984, was a place for contract manufacturers to connect with customers. Flash forward to today, we've got the internet, social media, a much more sophisticated industry, and you've got a much greater awareness of what the role of contract manufacturers are. For many customers, it is a first resort, unless you've got some proprietary technology in-house. And if you're looking to start up a new program, a new service, a new product, you would oftentimes go to a toller or a contract manufacturer to begin this operation. So let's look first at some trends that we have witnessed in contract manufacturing before we get into the specifics of the partnership between the purchaser and the supplier. So for quite a while now, there's been a lot of business, obviously, overseas and in Southeast Asia, China, of course, most notable. And so lots of our members are doing more tolling business for customers in China and other parts of the developing world. However, obviously, over the last year or so, we've seen a slowdown in China. Their GDP, of course, is not what it was several years ago. They are expecting that the current pace of economic growth in China is going to be continuing for quite some time. So this is a new reality. Also, we are seeing that the costs of running plants, environmental compliance, what's happening overseas with the infrastructure is causing their cost structures to increase. And so their margins are becoming squeezed, and they're not as competitive as they once were. So what's happening is that you're seeing some business that's coming over to the United States from places like China, which is obviously a good thing for US contract manufacturers. Also, some of the bigger European companies are driving more of their tolling business to the United States, where their customers are. Obviously, there's cost to transport materials, and so they want to have their products manufactured closer to the end-use markets. And if you look at the overall global economy, the US really is the bright spot in the entire world. Even though our growth has been not as spectacular as we would like, it is still more robust than really anywhere else in the world, and more sustainable, we feel. So we're seeing what I call a reshoring of some manufacturing, and our members are saying, both on the industrial side and also on the contract manufacturing side, the CDMO side, that they are seeing an uptick in tolling business as a result of some of this onshoring of activity. A second trend is the fact that there are fewer specialty chemical plants that are being built in the United States. Obviously, the chemical industry went through a great contraction in the 90s and the early 2000s. And so these days, with fracking and the shale gas revolution, there's a good emphasis in the news on developing petrochemical plants, but not so much new toll manufacturing plants. And so we're finding that some of the larger chemical companies are investing more of their resources in going asset light and shifting more of their production to contract manufacturers, such as in the SOCMA membership. Tollers that we know and love have a very healthy mix of customers. If you go back 15, 20, 25 years ago, a lot of their business was serving customers perhaps of a much smaller size. Now you see the full range of customers, from the large multinationals to the small mom and pops. There really is no limit to the types and the sizes of customers that a contract manufacturer can service. And so they are really enjoying a broader customer base in which to operate. Private equity. Private equity is an ever-present force in the specialty chemical sector. Many SOCMA members are owned by private equity firms. And what we're seeing is that sometimes a private equity venture will come in and they will split up a company. They may take over a portion of a larger company, and say, you know what, we don't want this contract manufacturing business. We don't feel the margins are where they need to be, so they will spin that off. And so we are seeing some tollers or contract manufacturers who are being spun off from some of these larger conglomerates. And we see that trend is going to continue. They just don't view the tolling operation as perhaps financially attractive as their internal benchmarks might warrant. I mentioned the fact that some of the larger companies out there are going asset light. When I talked to the folks at Dow and DuPont, and this was before all the news about the merger, this has really been a very, very prevalent trend in the market to have these companies, the Dows and the DuPonts of the world, to say, you know what, before we put steel in the ground, we're going to really look at a toll manufacturer and go out and figure out if there's a more economical way to have them manufacture this particular chemical and not obviously invest any infrastructure, because we don't know where this product's going to go. We're not sure what the growth potential of this product is. So rather than take the risk in investing in their own capital, they're going to outsource that production. And just yesterday, I was talking with one of our members who's in the audience, and he mentioned that, interestingly, European chemical companies who are in the tolling business are becoming more competitive price-wise here in the United States. And so, whereas you had in the past a lot of low-cost product from China and say Japan, now we're seeing some additional competition from some of the European contract manufacturers that are exporting their products here to the States, and their products, because they're operating on lower margins, they're trying to increase their market share globally. So the US contract manufacturers are starting to see some more competition from the European counterparts. So it is a very, very competitive landscape, but it can be a very lucrative landscape depending upon how you structure your business relationships. And if you have a proprietary technology or a portfolio of technologies, this is going to set you apart from the competition. In the old days, a lot of the contract manufacturers were known as quote-unquote tollers. Tollers, in my mind, refers to, and there is no definitive definition of what is a toller versus what is a contract manufacturer, but a toller, in my mind, was somebody who was basically leasing equipment, leasing their space, their capacity to other companies. Whereas a contract manufacturer, in my mind, is somebody who's a little more sophisticated, who's going to be a little more invested in the operation. They're going to be developing the proprietary technology. They may start out in the laboratory arena with a potential customer and scale up the process. So there's a lot of capabilities that are available to a purchaser of these services. So those are some of the trends that we are seeing. And you may have others that you have witnessed in the marketplace, but these are what I have learned through my conversations with industry stakeholders. Now, obviously, a lot of compelling factors that support the tolling relationship from the toller's perspective or from the contract manufacturer's perspective. Obviously, the contract manufacturer is going to be able to offer the advantages of flexibility and time sensitivity. They can operate more in a just-in-time environment, which is obviously very critical these days. A toller or a contract manufacturer can respond more quickly when it comes to investing in capital infrastructure, putting steel in the ground, and also setting pricing strategies. The smaller companies tend to be more nimble in setting their pricing structures, and they can be a little more reflexive and more responsive to figuring out what the price point should be for the purchaser. If a toller has the ability to put a capital project in the ground, typically they can do it at a fraction of the cost of some of the larger folks. There's less approval process, less layers of bureaucracy that you would find in, say, in a larger company. And so they can put the project on a faster track to completion and get that product up and running. They feel the value that the customer can extract from a toller is much higher than what the customer could extract internally if they put their own steel in the ground. And as I mentioned earlier, the toller, the contract manufacturer, can offer a much more complete technology package. So it's not just the actual hardware, the reactors, and all the unit operations that go into making the product, but also the formulation, the recipe, as I call it. What is the process? What is the methodology? And so it's the full range of the spectrum. It's from just leasing the equipment to actually providing the proprietary technology, or scaling up from a laboratory or semi-workspaces all the way up to full production. A lot of flexibility. And a lot of our members within the SOCMA family have long-standing relationships. And many of these relationships started out on a laboratory scale project. and then they scaled up over the years. And obviously, all of that requires a very, very high level of trust. Must have the trust and the security that both parties bring to the equation. And so that can't be overstated. And from a customer's perspective, again, obviously, customers that are managing their capital reinvestment, it makes it much more reasonable for them to turn to a contract manufacturer and pay an extra 10 cents per pound, for example, for a particular product for tolling purposes, rather than putting their own investment in the ground. Obviously, as I mentioned earlier, the tolling relationship is going to require less approval time from the customer's perspective. They're going to be able to go out and solicit bids from several tollers or contract manufacturers and get approval in a quicker amount of time. So it really expedites the overall process if you really want to get to market with an innovative technology. Customer may have some new technology, but they can't get it from the laboratory into production or semi-production quickly enough, so they engage in what we call a hybrid tolling project. So again, the toller is going to assist with manufacturing optimization, figuring out the right reaction, the right set of characteristics and operating conditions, temperature, pressure, and so forth, separation technologies. The toller will provide that expertise, that input, and make sure that the right equipment is being used for filtration and separation and distillation and so forth. The toller will then be able to scale up the process because he's got that know-how in-house, and that ultimately could lead into full-scale manufacturing. Some tollers are approached because they have strong expertise in scaling up their production. And again, trust is a factor here. Intellectual property protection is paramount. Some tollers or contract manufacturers are solicited because they have a specific expertise in a type of chemistry. And so there's just, again, the whole gambit of expertise that these folks can bring. If you are a customer that is expanding into a new market, maybe you're expanding into a new geographic market, and you don't have a plant nearby where the customer base is, or for some reason you need to be in close proximity to the customer, or it's a new business completely, or at a product extension, then obviously they're going to look at a contract manufacturing relationship as something very attractive. Again, less risk to go out and have that product manufactured. So better to make the relationship, set it up with the contract manufacturer who can make an exact quantity of the product that they need at that time. And if the business for some reason does disappear, dry up, isn't sustainable, they really haven't sunk much money into the capital investment. So I think the story here, not to sound repetitive, is the fact that the tolling relationship provides the purchaser, whether the purchaser is a Dow, DuPont, BASF, or another SME, provides that company with a lot of flexibility and a lot of adaptability to creating and scaling up their chemical technology. And in fact, a lot of SOCMA members are doing business with other SOCMA members as an example. There's a lot of cross-fertilization of ideas. Folks, they come to the show here and they think, oh, well, we're only going to be getting business from those that are attending the show, but there's a lot of dialogue going on the sidelines between the exhibitors as well, because they have long-standing relationships. So what I then did is, switching to the purchaser side, is in the interviews with some of the big purchasing agents out there, again, Dow, DuPont, BASF, Ashland, others, what are they looking for in a toller, in a contract manufacturer? What are the factors that are most important to them? I don't think any of what I'm going to tell you is going to come as a big surprise, but it does, I think it bears to be restated. Number one is a strong environmental health safety practice. EH&S protocol, compliance with all regulations, how companies are managing their obligations is paramount to anybody looking to procure contract manufacturing services. Lots of things go into this. I'll put in a little plug for SOCMA's Chem Stewards program. Those companies that I did speak with who understand and know what SOCMA is all about, they very much value the Chem Stewards program, which is an EH&S management system. It's not prescriptive, but it helps a company manage its EH&S obligations. And by nature of the fact that it's a third-party audited program, it allows the purchaser, if you will, to feel a little more comfortable that the EH&S obligations are being complied with properly. So just because you are third-party certified doesn't mean you are going to be safe at all times. I wish that were the case. Things do happen. But overall, on average, there is definitely going to be a greater level of comfort with those that are practicing an EH&S program like chem stewards. And we are finding this more and more throughout the SOCMA membership, that they are getting shortlisted on contracts and finding greater opportunities with other stakeholders to engage. So that's definitely a factor that the folks that I spoke with discussed. Associated with that factor is the issue that if somebody is Chem Stewards certified, has gone through the audit, and or ISO certified, or OSHA 18000, or VPP, or any other myriad of company certification programs that are out there, a lot of times what will happen is that the audit requirements, so if you're dealing with Dow or DuPont, and they've got internal, or external, I should say, external audit requirements. So they're going to come in, they're going to audit your facility as a contract manufacturer. They oftentimes will streamline that auditing process. They will be able to take some of the pieces from your own auditing and streamline or expedite that process. And so that helps you, as a supplier, minimize that time in which you could be producing product. Depending on the type of chemistry or the unit operation, obviously that's going to dictate the type and the complexity of the audit. Audits of U.S. tollers, as I've been told, have uncovered some not so good apples. They're not performing EH&S well. Obviously, none of these are Chem Stewards companies. Supply chain liability is an issue for everybody up and down the supply chain. We have a relationship with the American Chemistry Council, which represents the big companies out there, and we are a very, very integral part of their supply chain. Again, our members are doing business with their members, and there's a lot of cross-fertilization. And from the petrochemical company who's making those basic building blocks, to the intermediate chemical companies, to the chemical distributors, to the resellers, the further processors, the formulators, the end user, how that person is using that chemical, all the way down to where that chemical is being applied in a product that's being purchased by a consumer, you and I. Everything has to be in sync. And if there's a bad actor anywhere along that supply chain, it's going to affect everybody in that supply chain and the overall chemical industry's image. And we've seen this countless times with what happened in West Virginia a couple years ago, West Texas a couple years ago. So who I spoke with indicated that, for the most part, North America and Europe and Canada are, quote-unquote, the least risky places to seek contract manufacturing services. Tollers in places like China and India and down in South America have tended to present a high risk or a higher risk. However, that's not a generalization. You pick and choose, but that's what they have found from time to time. There are very good tollers that are out there in these regions. Companies with global headquarters, which are a lot of these companies that I spoke with, they may be subject to different internal audit standards. So depending upon what the headquarter contract manufacturing department within, say, a BASF requires, you want to make sure that the recognition of a program like Chem Stewards applies. Some companies do not recognize the Chem Stewards program globally, and so they may be forced to apply a slightly different standard to tollers everywhere in the world. And so one of the things that our members are most mindful of the fact is that if you're dealing with certain companies that do have a global presence, the standards that they have for internal audits may not accept, if you will, that Chem Stewards is going to streamline the auditing process and inherently say that there's a lower risk profile. So it really depends upon the relationship that the contract manufacturer has with the purchaser. And obviously, if you are considered a higher risk, if you have a track record where perhaps you have not complied as consistently with the H&S obligations, then you are going to be subject to a more comprehensive audit by your customer. Okay? Another factor, obviously, is maximizing the utility of the company's assets. So this would be from the standpoint, again, of your purchaser. If the companies require ancillary needs, they're going to go out, they're going to procure the services of the toller. Again, finding the right fit is key. They may have an urgent need to have a product made for them. They may not have availability to access their preferred toller for whatever reason. I mean, the challenge of running a contract manufacturing process is really in the scheduling and the balance. It's a very, very difficult, sometimes proposition to figure out how to balance various productions of all the different products that some of these contract manufacturers make. There may be a seasonality to some of the production cycles. There may be times of the year where there's a greater demand or a need. When there is excess capacity that's freed up, it just depends upon the materials work plan, if you will, by the contract manufacturer. So what I was told is that if the preferred toller is not available, they have to really do a lot of due diligence and look at these, if you will, second-tier tollers. And if they don't have a good relationship or don't really know you, they're going to spend a lot of time doing that due diligence, and that it's going to take some time. Some other key factors that were cited, oftentimes it's not just the contract manufacturing procurement folks, and I think everybody in this audience knows this, that makes the decision to contract with you as a toller. It oftentimes is the business unit head, which will depend oftentimes on the research chemist or the applications engineer. Oftentimes it's a matrix approach as to who they're going to use as a contract manufacturer. And so one of the things that we try to work on for this show is the traffic that comes to Informex needs to be a healthy mix of procurement folks as well as technical folks. It's not just the person who's going to be comparing cents per pound, product A, product B, product C, toller A, toller B, toller C. A lot of other factors come into play, and that's why it really is a team approach to who makes those decisions. Obviously, we talked about EH&S compliance and track record. How knowledgeable is the contract manufacturer about a particular chemistry? Are you a specialist in iodine chemistry? Are you a specialist in a particular polymer chemistry? If you don't have that knowledge, but you've got great EH&S track record and availability of supply, doesn't matter. You've got to have that technical capability. How responsive is the contract manufacturer to requests for information? There's a very active dialogue that occurs from the time, actually before the contract is signed all the way through the relationship. So is there going to be a fair and equitable response time by you, the contract manufacturer, to your customer? Are you going to take a couple days to get back to somebody? Or are you going to do your best to get back to them within an hour or two? How critical is that? And every company is different in terms of what their expectations are for that. Product stewardship. We talked about the supply chain earlier. How integrated is the concept of product stewardship in the contract manufacturer's mindset? So what are they doing to maintain excellent and careful product stewardship from the materials that you as a contract manufacturer purchase to how you distribute that product? What is your emergency response protocol? What are you doing as a company to respond? Are you tied into your local emergency planning committee, the LEPC? Are you considered a leader in your community in terms of how you are addressing emergency issues? Do the first responders in your communities know where you are? Do they know the hazardous chemicals, chemicals of concern, if you will, that you are handling? Do they know how to respond to an accident? All of this comes into play with respect to building that relationship. Financial stability, obviously. The Dun & Bradstreet credit reports only go so far, but they're going to try to, and a lot of course, the contract manufacturers may be privately held and will only disclose so much information to the customer, but they are going to be very concerned about your financial stability. And so, obviously, there's going to be different levels of comfort in terms of what you as a contract manufacturer would disclose. Obviously, if the relationship is longer term, they're going to want to make sure that there's more financial stability, of course. A larger customer tends to have more upfront conversations with smaller firms about ownership, and are there any plans to sell the company or transfer the holdings to somebody else. Again, tollers and contract manufacturers will tend to shy away from sharing too much, but you need to give the purchaser an assurance that your company is sustainable and here to stay, right? One of the purchasers that I spoke with said that they had one interesting new requirement that they required, that they built into their purchasing agreements with contract manufacturers that said no child labor. Obviously, this doesn't apply to the United States. It was really more for China and Vietnam, and some of those places. They said there should be no child, obviously, labor employed by the entity who's doing the contract manufacturing for us at any time. So, as I wrap up here, looking more specifically about the way that the tolling agreement is structured, just some key conditions that were mentioned to me. More emphasis on EHS audits, intellectual property protection. Obviously, we want to make sure that the contract manufacturer doesn't steal the purchaser's technology if that company is bringing it to the table, and vice versa. Assignment. A lot of M&A, a lot of businesses are going through changes in ownership, and so what happens if there is a spinoff? What happens if there is a merger, an acquisition by another company? How does that affect your tolling relationship, the contract? Is there assignment rights? That's something that obviously, if on the toller side, if they're sold off, purchaser's got to be concerned about the new owner, do the due diligence on the new owner. Same thing on the other side. I asked the industry folks that I spoke with, are there any differences in these agreements in the US versus other parts of the world? And they said, not really. Other than that comment I mentioned about the child labor, there really isn't that much different in how they structure these agreements, whether they're here in the States or overseas. They have a set of these parameters that they are needing to comply with. And really, in terms of how these agreements have changed over the last 5 to 10 years, not a lot of real changes in how the contract manufacturers are managed, if you will. Keeping tabs, again, good communication between the contract manufacturer and the purchaser is paramount. More frequent audits for the high-risk tollers. And even those that are more sophisticated, the big chemical customers, I'm sure, will tend to keep a tighter control on you, the contract manufacturer, and they will utilize what they've learned from you as they evaluate other contract manufacturers. So they are watching and they are observing and they are really looking at best practices, which is why we tout Chem Stewards as a must-have, because you can learn a lot about best practices through a program like that. So, in synopsis, top 5 factors in deciding what type of a contract manufacturer to select: EHS&S compliance, product quality and know-how, reliability of supply, how quickly can you respond, security, that's intellectual property security and physical plant security, and of course, financial stability. So I don't know if anybody has been further enlightened, but I found the research to be interesting from the perspective that the things that you would expect to be important from your purchaser is what is on top of mind. And so I learned a few new things, but I was heartened to hear that there was nothing out of the blue that didn't seem to make sense to me as a third party in terms of this relationship. So that being said, I thank you very much for your time and attention. Thank you.